Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being with us tonight for the Congressional District 16 Candidates Forum for the June 7th, 2022 election. I'm Liz Niss, president of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 after women won the right to vote. The League envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. The League is nonpartisan, meaning we neither support nor oppose candidates or parties, nor do we endorse any person. This is the very heart of our organization. We have two distinct roles. One is advocacy for public policy issues about which we have studied and developed formal positions. The other is voter service, which brings voters impartial information on issues and candidates. Voter service is the hat we're wearing today in presenting this forum where you can learn about the candidates running to represent you in Congressional District 16. Our co-sponsors for this forum tonight include the League of Women Voters of Cupertino-Sunnyvale, Los Altos, Mountain View, Southwest Santa Clara Valley, and North and Central San Mateo County. We're also being supported by Mid-Penn Media Center, and I want to give a special shout out to Congregation Beth Am for publicizing this forum to their members. I'd also like to remind everyone that the candidates and our co-sponsors have all agreed to participate under the guidelines set for this forum. And because this is a Zoom webinar, only the candidates and the moderator will have their microphones activated. This forum is being live streamed right now on one of Mid-Penn Media Center's local channels. It's also being recorded and will be re-aired on Mid-Penn Media channels in the coming weeks and also posted to the League's YouTube channel, the link to which will be found on our website, lwvpaloalto.org. Note that whenever this recording is aired, it must be shown in its entirety to ensure that no candidate statements are used out of context. All candidates have agreed to this requirement. Conducting a candidate seminar as a Zoom webinar is a relatively new experience for all of us, and we hope you'll be patient as we all learn together. Now, I'd like to turn the microphone over to our moderator, Sigrid Pensky. Welcome, Sigrid. Thank you for moderating tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Good evening, everyone. I'm a proud member of the League of Women Voters, and I'm delighted to be part of bringing you this opportunity to hear from 7 of the 8 candidates who are running for Congressional District 16. The candidates participating tonight are, in alphabetical order, Anna Eshoo, Richard Fox, John Frederick, Peter Otake, Ajwan Rading, Benjamin Solomon, and Greg Tanaka. Candidate Rishi Kumar is not present. We did invite Mr. Kumar, but he has sent a statement for us to read on his behalf. Before we begin, I want to remind the candidates in the audience that this evening we're hosting a forum and not a debate. There is no rebuttal, and we won't allow any personal attacks. Candidates have been asked to focus on their own campaigns. I'd like to go over briefly the format of our session. We're scheduled to be finished at 9. To help us do that, we're using a computerized stopwatch that will be visible to candidates only. Audience members, you might hear a 10-second reminder for 10 seconds remaining for the candidates. I do remind our candidates to respect our time limits. I will enforce them. We will begin with opening statements of up to 2 minutes from each candidate. The order for the opening statements was determined randomly ahead of time. Then we have a question period. Candidates will be called on in varying order for each question, and we'll have up to 1 minute to answer each question. I remind candidates that you can provide shorter answers and we could get to more questions maybe. Also, I ask our candidates to keep themselves on mute when not speaking. Candidates for the questions for this forum have been solicited in advance from all those who registered to attend. In addition, tonight, you may send live questions by email to forumquestions@googlegroups.com. That email address is being posted in the chat right now. Also, I'll note that audience members can't comment in the chat. 3 league members are screening the questions we receive to avoid duplication and to cover as wide a range of issues as possible. We, in some cases, might combine questions if we get a lot on one topic. Following the question period, we'll hear a closing statement from each candidate of up to 1.5 minutes. Those statements are given in the reverse order of the opening statements. All right, that's our process. We're going to get started. We will go to opening statements. And Mr. Otake, you're first.
All right. Thank you, President Niss and the League of Women Voters Palo Alto. We appreciate your putting together this forum, and thank you all of those who are joining us on Tuesday night. Congresswoman Eshoo, we appreciate your nearly 30 years of service to this district. Respectfully, however, with 8 candidates running, it's clear that voters want a change. Voters want a credible alternative in the November election this year, not just another shade of blue. Silicon Valley deserves a representative who reflects our values, education, and tech experience with the leadership qualities to affect change in Washington. I'm the best qualified candidate. I grew up here, a Woodside High School grad, earned economics and finance degrees from Harvard and Stanford, was a tech startup CFO, worked for a national security think tank, and served 8 years as a Menlo Park council member and former mayor. I'm also a dad of 3 teenagers attending local public schools. My experience has prepared me to address the major issues facing our country today: rising crime, including violence against Asians, uncontrolled inflation, national security challenges, the demise of single-family neighborhoods, and aging transportation infrastructure and related to climate change. These issues are too important to wait until who wins the White House in 2024. We can't afford another backbencher, someone who toes the party line, but instead we need a representative who has the experience working across the aisle to find common sense solutions that have bipartisan support. Please lend me your open mind as I propose common sense solutions that will break the partisan gridlock in Washington, D.C. And let's remember tonight Norm Mineta, who passed away, mayor of San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick, you're next.
Good evening, everybody, friends, fellow voters, and members of the League. It's a privilege to be here tonight, and I recall that it was almost 50 years ago when I first ran for Congress. In 1974, I ran in the Republican primary against Pete McCloskey. He won that election and went on to champion one of my favorite causes, which was ending the war in Vietnam. He succeeded in being a leader in cutting off the funding for that war. So I believe that participation is the key to moving the needle. And tonight's a night for you, the voters, to take a look at us. You can see my program in the sample ballot. It'll be mailed to you. I have a rather ambitious program. When I ran 50 years ago, I ran on pro-ERA and war. I was against the Alaska pipeline. I'm still against pipelines, both the XL and the Dakota. And I believe we need to respond to the challenges of today with aggressive action by the national government and with legislation and congressional action. And by congressional action, I include ERA. It's important now, especially, to get women's right of equality on the books. You were founded 100 years ago. The ERA amendment was proposed nearly 100 years ago, March of 1923. And so it's long overdue. It needs to get done. And I would hope to be a party to pushing it across the finish line. In addition, I think we can make meaningful gun control And along those lines, in my sample ballot statement, I have my proposal for meaningful gun control registration and database of guns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fox, you're next.
All right, hope that's working.
Go ahead.
So I have made COVID-19 the main issue in my campaign for two reasons. First, as a physician, I have treated hundreds for COVID-19 with drugs that Dr. Fauci disapproved of, and I've had no deaths at all. Meanwhile, more than 1 million Americans died following Dr. Fauci's recommendations. India used the same drugs that Dr. Fauci disapproved of for Americans and cut its deaths by 85%. The FDA admits that more than 14,000 Americans have died after COVID-19 shots. These shots should be banned, not mandated. The second reason is that the massive mishandling of COVID-19 by Dr. Fauci and the deep state has also led to the ruin of our economy with massive unemployment and business closures. Our economy was kept alive only by massive money printing that has now led to runaway inflation. Our children and young people lost a year or more of their educations. We had the imposition of a dictatorship run by Dr. Fauci and the deep state, and the near death of our democracy. The deep state model of government has failed all across the country, all across all age and racial groups. It failed to prevent runaway inflation. It is failing to educate our young, especially those of color, with skills that will allow them to get good jobs, buy homes, start families, and be economically secure. Crime is out of control, especially in Democrat-controlled communities of color. The Democrats have now set up a disinformation board to make sure that no one hears anything negative about them. Democrats don't solve problems, they just make them worse. If you think the Democrats are doing a great job, re-elect them. If not, vote for change. I ask you to vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rodding, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ajwan Radding, and it's such an honor to be here today. First, I just want to thank the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto for hosting this forum. The League is an incredible organization with a long history of giving women a voice in the political process, as well as protecting and preserving the right to vote, and I'm honored to be here. I would be remiss not to highlight first and foremost that as we're seeing in current events, the war against women continues, and it's time to ensure that we don't go backwards at this critical juncture. I believe the upcoming primaries and the general election ahead will be a referendum on reproductive rights, equality, and climate action. We should question how we got here and ensure we seek a new kind of leadership that takes the actions necessary. Now, as background, I have an unorthodox story to be running for office, let alone for Congress. I am someone who grew up unhoused, living out of a 2001 Dodge Neon alongside my single mom for 12 years of my life, over 12 years. And that makes someone like me aware of public policy earlier than most. I went on to go to UCLA for undergrad, work at the Clinton Peace Center in Northern Ireland, serve as a national security and criminal justice aide to Senator Cory Booker, investigate lynchings of African Americans, as well as pursue anti-death penalty litigation in Montgomery, Alabama, and throughout the American South. And today, against all odds, I'm an attorney at a law firm called Wilson Sonsini, where I represent historically disenfranchised and underrepresented founders. But I'm running because I think we're running out of time on the issues we care most about. And it's time. I have a sense of urgency for action on many fronts, and that's what's led me to run for Congress. So thank you for having me. I appreciate this.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tanaka, you're next.
Thank you. My name is Greg Glenn Tanaka. It is an honor to be here. It's actually a pleasure to also be on Zoom with President Nis. I really miss serving with you on council. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for getting this set up and everyone for attending. So for as you can probably tell from my last name, Japanese American, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad were all in the internment camps. My family lost their grocery store. My grandfather died in the camps. My dad never finished his education as a result. As a result, we kind of grew up in a really poor part of LA. And I had to learn the value of hard work and education. By doing so, I was able to attend Caltech and UC Berkeley. I've been able to live, I was fortunate enough to be able to work my way up, and I've been in Palo Alto since 2004. I've built startups, raised a family, have 2 kids at Poly right now. And I had the honor of serving the people of Palo Alto as a council member through the depths of the pandemic. I also really admire the League of Women Voters mission in terms of getting people to vote. I also started a nonprofit called 8x8, which is trying to encourage more Asian Americans to vote. And running for Congress wasn't really my plans. I wasn't really thinking about that, but there are some really big concerns that I have. The first one is runaway inflation. So we look at our food cost, our housing cost, our healthcare cost, highest in 40 years. Our country used to be #1 in education, and today we're in the middle of the pack. We look at climate change. It's one of the biggest existential threats to humanity. I serve also on the water board here. We have the worst drought in 1,200 years, but I don't really see a plan to solve this. And we also have an assault on women's rights. So I really look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
Good evening, everyone. My thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum and for your important work, especially where we are today with our democracy at home and democracy abroad under attack. And even in this race, there is misinformation and disinformation. As the only woman in this race and one who has fought my entire adult life to advance the equality of women and girls, yesterday's leaked document revealed a devastating blueprint that the Supreme Court is poised for the first time in our history to eviscerate a constitutional right by overturning Roe v. Wade. This is not only deeply, deeply disrespectful of women, it will also have devastating impacts, especially on low income and minorities. Our reproductive choice is personal, it's private, and it's serious. We should trust women to make that choice. I'm proud to sponsor and have voted for the Health Protection Act to codify Roe. The need for this legislation has never been more urgent, and the Senate must act immediately to preserve women's rights over our bodies. I'm running to address these issues, which I've championed, and to get us through many challenges: climate change, the pandemic, inflation, and continuing America's critical leadership to help Ukraine save its democracy and defeat authoritarianism. And I have the experience to best help us meet these challenges. So I look forward to our discussion this evening and my work on behalf of you, the people I've been so privileged to represent.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, you're next.
Hi, I am really honored to be here, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having me here. I have 40 years working experience in industry, in credit risk, commercial and industrial lending, corporate strategy, and management consulting. I've worked for Texas Instruments, GMAC, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, UMB Bank, which is a regional bank out in the Rockies, and for Westport, Malaysia, which started out as an infrastructure project and ended up being the 6th largest port in the world. I am a critic of Dodd-Frank, bank stress testing, and COVID-19 models. I wrote the quarterly US economic report for this bank for 2 years straight. I have lived in Malaysia. It is the only country that has practiced identity politics for 52 years. And as a second-class citizen of identity politics, I will tell you it is wrong. And therefore, one of the things we have to do is to fix these mistakes we are now beginning to implement in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have a statement to read from Mr. Kumar, who is not with us here tonight. Rachel?
My sincere apologies for being unable to attend this candidate forum. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. My run for Congress is about restoring ethics in politics. I hope to earn your trust and your vote. You can find out more at rishikumar.com. I will never sell out. America needs leaders with integrity, and I'm ready to serve in the newly formed 16th Congressional District. Many of you may remember me from the November 2020 general election. In largely the same congressional district, we were honored to have won 127,000 votes, better than any incumbent challenge in the last 30 years. We are back for victory 2022. America's future is in jeopardy. Lifers, sold out politicians stay too long, do very little, are blissfully out of touch, and play divisive politics to get reelected, while gas prices and inflation spikes. We suffer record crime and a declining education system, while draconian mandates like SB 9 facilitate a historical California land grab, thanks to the nexus between politicians and land developers. I will champion Medicare for all and always reject corporate PACs and special interest group money. I will fight for your interests, never special interests, and I will never legislate on behalf of pharma. As a mechanical engineer, high-tech executive, council member of Saratoga, I reduced crime, defeated many San Jose water rate hikes, stopped frivolous tax increases, asked for an audit of the California Housing Department's housing element numbers, and stopped massive development in a high fire risk zone. I was humbled to be reelected with the most votes in 64 years of my city's election history for tackling the tough challenges and delivering results. Our neighbors are saying we need new blood in public office who will get things done. I would be honored to earn your vote on June 7th. Vote rishikumar.com.
Thank you very much. Now it's time to go to our audience questions. As I said, you'll each have 1 minute to answer the questions. Our first question is, what is your view of the Digital Services Act just passed by the EU, which endeavors to combat misinformation? Should we consider such measures? And for this question, Congresswoman Eshoo, you're first.
Well, I salute the Europeans for taking this issue on and taking it over the line. The Europeans have their own view, but this is a responsibility that must be met in the United States of America. We see the damage that is done to our democracy relative to disinformation, misinformation, and the lack of privacy. I'm very proud to have offered legislation in both areas. One for the issue of misinformation and disinformation relative to algorithms, and the other on privacy. Academicians have said that my legislation on privacy is the singularly most comprehensive in the entire Congress. So we have to work to get these issues over the finish line, and I'm proud of my legislative product. And in both cases, there is bipartisan support.
Thank you. Dr. Fox, you're next.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. I'm with Elon Musk. As you know, his view is that a free and open internet, which allows expression of all points of view, is essential to our democracy. As soon as we start to tinker with that, the people who happen to be in power, whether they're on the left or the right, they will start using it to their own advantage. Our founders put the First Amendment in the Constitution for a very good reason, and there's no reason now why 250 years later we should change that at all. So I'm with Elon Musk, and I think we need free, open, and discussion of all controversies in order to realize the potential of our democracy. It's the best in the world.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick, you're next.
I agree with regulation and protection of privacy, and I applaud the European Union for what it's been doing in a number of areas, but especially that. I, however, think that where the rubber hits the road is in the committees of Congress and the ability to mark up legislation and reach some understanding of where the role of regulation throughout the new technologies needs to be. And toward that end, the important thing is not only to work this stuff up in committee, but get it out on the floor and get everybody on record for what they stand for and where they're going to vote. Because it's way too easy for these mega corporations to purchase leverage that then leads to legislation that benefits them. So I want action, and I want to see floor vote.
Thank you. Mr. Otake, you're next.
Yes, while I support strong laws about privacy protection, I too am very concerned about when government is placed in the role of deciding what is misinformation or illegal information, as mentioned in the DSA. The concern that I have when government plays in that role is that means whoever's is the party in charge of the government, again, could be either party. It's going to open interpretation on that, and I'm much more supportive of a free speech platform that then allows controls about hate speech and things like that. And the algorithms have to be changed around polarization. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Riding, you're next.
Thank you. I think this is a fantastic question because it gets really to the core of what is this geography's role in Congress, and then what is the United States' role in its leadership in terms of how do we actually fight misinformation and disinformation? Look, as a technology attorney, I see these issues every single day, and the nuances are great. First and foremost, the law should be hailed, but it's amusing to me that the EU is leading on this issue and not the United States. And in fact, China actually took its own steps several months ago in really trying to tackle privacy issues within its own country. I think first and foremost, we need to be conceptualizing what is our role with these big companies in our own neighborhoods, and understand that anti-competitive behavior, social media's effects on elections, and privacy invading business models should be tackled by a digital Bill of Rights.
Thank you very much. Mr. Solomon.
There are two issues here. First is free markets. I'm a strong believer in free markets, and let the markets decide. It's the most efficient economic structure we can find on this planet. And therefore, I agree with Elon Musk. We need to do something about it. Secondly, with all computers and all algorithms, garbage in, garbage out. Doesn't matter what your laws are, because programmers will figure out how to subvert the whole process. I used to be a programmer, I know. So what we need to do is actually learn to manage the people who do the programming. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's actually a critical question. Social media has become an echo chamber. There's misinformation issues, there's privacy issues, but freedom of speech is critical to our country. And I believe banning freedom of speech is not the answer. What we need is a fundamental understanding of the technology. I know that there's been proposals out there to call recommendation engines, basically the technology that recommends what video to watch next or what social media post to read as being a dangerous algorithm. But if you were actually to ban that, the internet would be unusable. So what we need is not a sledgehammer, but a scalpel. I'm a computer science major, I'm a machine learning expert. And what we need is a nuanced hand in what's going on. There's some new technology called Web3, which really aligns the incentives. So people have an incentive to behave properly, and they also own their own data. What we really need is a legislator for the digital age. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have our second question. This has to do with climate change. What more can Congress do to combat climate change? And Dr. Fox, you're first for this question.
Thank you. So I'm troubled by the state of the science of climate change. What COVID-19 taught me is that government-funded research usually reaches the conclusion that the government wants it to reach. And I'm concerned that that may be the case with climate change. So I really am not convinced how serious the problem is and to the extent to which we can change that problem by banning all forms of fossil fuel, because the costs of that are just stupendous. So I think we really need a much more unbiased workup of the science, and then we can approach this problem more confidently. So I'm not one way or the other, but I think we need more data. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
I support Special Envoy John Kerry's jawboning on this issue and his pledge to say that we will try to meet the COP26 goals. I think that 45% reduction is within reach. I think one of the things we need to do to reach it is end subsidies with the petroleum industry. I read the other day a report from Channel 4 in England with that for 115 million in money to play, they got 15 billion in tax deductions, have received 92 billion in from the gravy train over in the last 20 some years, and we need to do something about that. I think to promote a full discussion of the topic of energy conservation, it might be useful to discuss the nationalization of oil, such as Chevron and ExxonMobil.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
The issue of climate change is an existential one. And we now have the opportunity, I think, of a lifetime to pass the most comprehensive climate legislation in the history of our country. I voted for that legislation in the House. In the Build Back Better legislation, we appropriated over $500 billion for the implementation of it to reach the goals that Mr. Frederick spoke to. It is comprehensive and it is in the Senate now. So the work has been done. The hearings have been held. The scientists have testified. The stakeholders have come forward. We know that we have a limited time. Now, the Biden administration is leading on this, and we are now part of the Paris Agreement once again, which I think is a necessity because it's a global issue.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Yes, I did the calculations myself. Emissions carbon dioxide accounts for only 0.001% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So how can changing emission standards affect global warming? It cannot. So the next question is, why didn't the politicians ask our scientists, what are they up to? And why are our global alarmist scientists not telling us the whole truth? They said, if the Antarctica melts, the sea levels will rise 200 feet. But the Antarctica, 85% of the Antarctica melts every summer and freezes every winter. Do the sea levels rise 170 feet and fall 170 feet? No.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Thank you for this question. I believe that this is probably the biggest existential threat to humanity's survival. Right now, we're suffering the worst drought in 1,200 years, so we need concrete action now. During the day, we actually have a lot of renewables from solar and wind, but at night, when the sun goes down and the wind stops blowing, we basically burn natural gas and we're emitting more carbon emissions. Energy storage is great, but pump hydro without water is tough, and it's also really expensive. So I don't agree with the idea of shutting down nuclear power. I know some people here want to, but I don't think that's the right thing. Nuclear is 20% of our power today. It's the biggest knob we could turn. It's carbon free. If you look at the safety of nuclear, less people have died. Only about 100 people total in the history of nuclear power have died versus 8 million people in 2018 from the burning of carbon fuel. Stanford has a proposal that we use nuclear to desalinate water during the day, solving our drought, and then at night provide electrical power. So it's a way to solve the climate change today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otaki.
Yes, I'm with renewable sources like wind power coming down to under $50 per megawatt hour. I'm quite confident that we'll be able to achieve renewable sources for our electric power. I'm also confident with the advances in electric vehicles. The issue is with mass transit, and that we have to make mass transit easier. And our congressional representatives should be fighting for our fair share of the $1.2 trillion infrastructure spending bill. California is only receiving 5% of that when we have over 10% of the population. We should be getting 120 billion. Silicon Valley relies on a 160-year-old train line without grade separations or a crossing to connect to BART in the East Bay. Yet 10 billion of previous federal money is going to high-speed rail train to nowhere. Transportation is the largest generator of GHG. We've got to address this.
Thank you. Mr. Rotting.
Yeah, look, I think I don't want to repeat the rhetoric that this is the greatest existential threat. We know that. If you read the UN IPCC's report that came out about a month ago, they say we have less than 10 years. This is why I entered into the race. And arguably, if there's any congressional district that is on the front lines of climate change, and arguably the first, it is actually this one. When you think about Pacifica to the Bay Area, our coastside communities, to our agricultural communities, to the wildfires that we experience in this district, we are on the front lines. However, at the same time, we have all the ideas, we have the entrepreneurship, we have the academics, we have the activists and the spirit of innovation to really bring the solutions to this issue. So one thing I want to do is create a climate innovation hub to really bring together the leaders of all these communities together to propose the biggest solutions, as well as talk about financing, because climate change is still an issue reserved for the wealthiest communities, and we need to conceptualize how do we spread those ideas to the rest of the world.
Thank you. All right, our next question is on housing. We got quite a few on this topic. How would you use your federal position to advance local issues such as the housing crisis? What resources would you commit to helping the unhoused in California? And for this question, Mr. Frederick, you're first.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that question, as I have some experience as a recipient of Section 8 subsidies when a younger person. I was a substitute teacher making $12,000 a year in Palo Alto, if you can imagine that, dating myself there. But it was absolutely essential to keeping people in the workforce, in the community, where not only we could do things like teach school, but participate in church, AYSO soccer, stuff like that. So I think where the rubber hits the road in federal subsidies for housing is getting the housing built and then supporting people to stay in the housing, particularly American Indian and Black single parents. There was no reason why Rotting there should have been in a car. He should have been in he and his parents should have been in a Section 8 unit.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I actually, for those of you that live in Palo Alto, you guys probably know that for my city council campaigns, both of them, I campaigned on affordable housing. So this topic is in particular of interest to myself. My family, ourselves, we also received some subsidies, so I'm really grateful for that. And I think what we want to do is we want to make sure that everyone has a base level standard of living. Otherwise, you have this spiral where people never get out of there. I think the real way to solve the housing crisis is to actually have smaller units. If you look at the average size of the American family, it's been getting smaller and smaller. At the same time, the houses have been getting bigger. So clearly a problem. And then in terms of the unhoused, I think we have to look at the cause. Homelessness is not the cause. Homelessness is a result, it's a symptom. So a portion of homelessness is caused by economic, only maybe 20%. A large part is caused by mental health. There's also a part that's caused by drug use. So we have to address each of these causes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rotting.
If there's any issue that is tied to my story and me being on the stage with everyone, it is this issue of housing. Look, I think there's a myth pushed out by Congress that the only thing that Congress can do is give poor folks money. I think that's a myth. My policy team with some academics from Stanford found that for every one unhoused person in Santa Clara County, there's actually 4.3 available housing units. There's a miscorrection, there's something wrong with the market. And so what I'm trying to argue is like, look, hey, corporate landlords, if you've got vacancy, let's give you a tax break until you lower the price where it meets demand. Additionally, look, we've got private equity investors as well as foreign investors buying up homes in our neighborhoods and keeping them empty. I just think this is so outrageous. I think federal government's actually the one level of government that is equipped to try and regulate this space meaningfully and intelligently while supporting homeownership for people who are trying to move to the community.
Thank you. Dr. Fox, you're next.
Thank you. I can remember back to Lyndon Johnson's Great Society when we've had housing bills, and even going back to World War II housing bills. This has been on the government's agenda, the federal government's agenda for a long time, but yet we have a worse problem now than we did after World War II or even during the Great Society. So I'm not sure that this problem can be solved by federal subsidies. We've tried that. It seems to me that the housing market is way overregulated. It's way too costly to put up houses. The land is too regulated. It's too hard to build. So I think we need some new approaches to this. More of the same is probably just going to continue the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Hi, I agree with some of the speakers. I was here in California in 1978 and I saw it. It was such a beautiful state. People were happy. They were going around their business as if the whole world had opened up to them. Today we have filth, we have homelessness, we have people, crime. That cannot be solved overnight. Throwing money at these problems is not going to happen because that's been happening. Throwing money has been happening for many, many years. What we need to do is straighten out our education system, give the kids good nutrition, give the kids good education and mentoring, get them up to grade 12, and then let them decide what they want to do with their lives. If you don't have a good education, you cannot get a good job. You cannot survive in California today.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
Well, first, I think it's important to note that the federal government doesn't regulate space. What we do, and I know the benefits of it because I served in county government where one of my responsibilities directly on the ground was housing. And what we have done and continue to do more of, more Section 8 certificates, housing for veterans, homelessness and homes for the homeless. And those dollars are used by cities and towns. They can acquire properties and convert them for housing for people. So on each one of those fronts, every single one of them representing hundreds of people, thousands of people, we can make a real difference by what we do at the national level. And I have voted for that as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Otake, you're next.
Yes, I co-chaired Menlo Park's first housing element in 20 years. And I understand the process to be able to do that, but it generates market rate housing. It doesn't generate affordable housing. And most of the affordable housing programs, including below market rate that our peninsula cities do, the cost is still like 800,000 per unit. That has to come down. The federal government can provide land like we did at the VA hospital for housing for vets. That was something I'm very proud to be part of. We could also convert commercial space into housing. But I'll tell you the way that we should not be doing. SB 9. SB 9 it came down and ends single family zoning, overrides local control with a one size fits all unfunded state mandate that will turn our neighborhoods into high density condos. That's not the way to do this.
Thank you. Our next question is on democracy. How concerned are you about how polarized our country has become? Is our democracy at risk? What are your plans to ensure our democratic future? 1 minute. Mr. Otake, you're first.
Okay. Yeah, I'm certainly concerned about the polarization of our society and the politicization of our society. I think social media does have a part of that. I mentioned earlier about my concern about algorithms that divide rather than provide balanced news and information to recipients out there. But we've also had polarization in the past. You go back in American history and you go back to the Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams presidential times. There was lots of polarization going on at that time. We can manage it by common sense solutions, by getting representatives of each party to reach out to each other and find common ground. And we can show that as an example.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo.
Very issue in my opening statement. We have a deeply divided country. I think that the former president did much to advance that, but this is our day, this is our time, this is our responsibility. What can be done? First, we need to protect the sacredness of the vote. The sacredness of the vote. That is the ultimate manifestation of our democracy. HR 1, which I voted for, which is now over in the Senate, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and to restore the Voting Rights Act to its fullness in our country are absolutely essential. Absolutely essential.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think, as we all know, there's a lot of gridlock in Washington, D.C. Instead of solving problems, there's a lot of argument and not much action. There's this kind of red team versus blue team idea, where the red team can vote for a blue team idea and vice versa. Really what we should be doing is, rather than each elected official voting with their party, we should vote for the best idea. If you look at my track record on city council, you'll see that I'm a very independent voter on city council. I'm data driven. I look at each side of the issue and then make a decision. And I think that's what we need to do, because if we look at, no matter what party you are, I think we're more alike than not. I think the enemy is not in this country. The enemy is maybe Putin and Russia, but we need to work together. We need to find the middle ground. We need to figure out how do we move forward rather than try to continue this partisan fighting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rotting.
I had the pleasure of knowing the late Representative John Lewis when I worked for Senator Booker's office. And the few times we went out to lunch together, he spoke about this issue. It was his core issue, and it is what he spent his life fighting. I think it's been well commented on, so I'll speak about another issue that I think is just as core to democracy: money in politics. My campaign is not taking any corporate PAC money or special interest money. Why? Because I think core to the question of whether what makes a good representative and the policies that come out of a congressional district is a simple formula. Money in equals policy out. Who you take money from is what is indicative of the policies you're fighting for when no one else is looking. And so I think it's imperative for us to really think about campaign finance reform, but also speak about what are we trying to do in terms of our representatives and what are they fighting for and who are they taking money from?
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
Well, I don't think we can talk meaningfully about democracy without the idea of majority rule. And the number one target for me in terms of majority rule is getting rid of the Electoral College, which allows a person with fewer popular votes to be made president of the United States. Secondly, in the area of voting rights, we need to reassert the Voting Rights Act, the sections that were eliminated through Citizens United, McCutcheon, Shelby versus Holder. They need to be strengthened. In fact, in every respect, I think the solution to the restriction of rights and the winnowing down of democracy is action by Congress. Article 1 of the Constitution gives specific powers to Congress to legislate. And that gets back to this issue of giving things to a vote in Congress. And that's what I recommend for continuing and strengthening democracy.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Fox.
Thank you. We have a democracy and we try to settle our differences through healthy debate and then by voting. And the ones who win the election get power and they implement their program. And if it's successful, they'll be reelected. And if it's not, they'll probably be voted out. So that's a healthy democracy. The other things that are healthy about our democracy is we have a lot of issues that are reserved to the states. And different states can adopt different approaches depending on the needs of their people. And if some of those work better than those tried in other states, people can look at that model and decide if that's what they want to support. And if necessary, they can vote with their feet and go to the model that they support. So that's the way our system works.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Yes, I believe that our democracy is at a threat. It's not by the people, it's not by the regulation, it's by our congressional members, both Senate and House of Representatives. They vote as a bloc. And because they vote as a bloc, they set the example for the rest of the population to vote as a bloc. Thank God, Senator Manchin and Sinema are showing that it is possible to have independent minds. That's what we need to do. We need to stop our representatives and our senators to vote as a bloc, get themselves informed of what's really happening and vote by what they believe is right.
Thank you. Before we go on to our next question, I would like to remind our candidates to try and stick to the topic of the question when you're giving your answer, please. Next is healthcare. The question is, what role, if any, should government play in helping Americans obtain health insurance? And for this question, Mr. Rotting, you're first.
There is, when we speak about private markets versus the role of the federal government in healthcare, it's quite odd to me as the world's richest country that we still have these questions. And in particular, when we speak about the wealthiest congressional district in all of the United States, I think that what often gets understated in that is that often is code for the largest wealth inequality. We have people who don't have access to education, quality healthcare. My point in being is the federal government needs to play a decisive role in first and foremost tackling drug prices. the fact that we still can't negotiate for Medicare, still can't negotiate drug prices is just an outrageous thing and needs to be tackled as one of the most premier things. But we should be aiming towards a universe of universal health care, where we need to be thinking incrementally, we need to be thinking pragmatically. But as the wealthiest country, and especially as the wealthiest congressional district, we should be the leading voice on this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Yes, there's something really wrong with our healthcare system. When you have to pay several $1,000s for a few stitches, that shows you something is wrong. The whole thing has to be turned upside down and revisited and refigured out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otaki.
We've got to be able to improve the competitiveness within our healthcare system. So exactly that issue that where we have these issues where it's a couple $1,000s for stitches really doesn't make much sense at all. So we have to improve that competitiveness of different plans. We do need a safety net. We do, and that safety net has to be a low-cost catastrophic health insurance that makes sure that regardless of whether you have a major illness, you will be able to have that insurance to cover that. And then finally, we need to be able to fund and support our community health clinics where people trust and are doing an amazing job at delivering preventive medicine at low cost to their communities.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you. So on city council, I'm in the habit of always looking at us Palo Alto against other cities. I think we need to look at best practices. If we compare our country against other countries, let's say quality versus cost, we have relatively high cost, and the quality, unless you're really rich, can be not so great. If you look at the Swiss model is actually really interesting. They have a relatively high quality and relatively low cost. And what they do is they mandate that everyone buys their own health insurance. So it's very much like you buy your own car insurance. And so there's more market competition when you buy the insurance. What this ensures is that less percentage goes towards overhead and more goes towards the people providing the service. And so when we look at something complex like healthcare or other issues, we need to look at things comprehensively and looking at other countries as well to see what works and what doesn't work. And by doing so, we're actually able to improve the service and lower the cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo.
Well, this is my favorite question so far because healthcare and universal coverage have been at the top of my list of priorities going back to my time on the Board of Supervisors, where I created the health plan of San Mateo County so that everyone would have health insurance. And that is still standing and doing superb work. In the Congress, I'm so proud of my role in passing the Affordable Care Act. Presidents, Republicans, Democrats had that as a national priority, but we got that done. And we've improved on it. In this last year, 6 million more are enrolled and $2,400 a year saved by families. So I take a backseat to no one on healthcare, the progress that we've made, and for the progress that we need to make, including the price of drugs, the price of insulin.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
I support universal single payer healthcare. I'm fond of both Bernie's idea of working down the age groups down to 60, 55 that way, and at the beginning, including all kids. So work up from the bottom and down from the top. Congresswoman Jayapal's bill seems to reach a lot of those points. The fact that the country spends twice as much as the other industrialized countries, even Switzerland, which Councilman Tanaka lauded, does it for 6,000 or so. So us to pay 12,000 and consume an extra 8 or 9% of the GDP to get the job done and not include everybody is a scandal. I mean, I can't understand how we can say that access is adequate. We need actual universal health care, not access.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
Thank you for the question. I'm a staunch supporter of free market medical care. They have it in Singapore. Singapore has better health statistics than we do by far, and they spend only about 25% as much on getting that medical care. We have a system that's dominated by big insurance companies, big hospital chains. These are monopolists, and that's why the costs are out of control. And because it's so costly, we can't afford to give everyone good medical insurance. So we need to deregulate that industry and get some competition in it, give people real choices so they're not looking at one or two plans every year, and bring costs down, and that will improve the care that we can deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is on the economy. How would you address economic pressures facing Americans? High inflation, gas prices, and other high prices, plus a fear of an economic downturn. For this question, Mr. Solomon, you're first.
All right. Inflation is now at 8.5%. And do not blame the Ukrainian war. It was at 7.9% before the war started. This inflation is our government's mess. They have nobody else to blame. What is the second part of the question?
The question is, how would you address economic pressures facing Americans, high inflation, gas prices, and
Right.
other high prices, economic downturn?
GDP has shrunk by 1.4%. And if it continues at that rate, we will be in a recession by the end of this year. So there are a lot of things we have to do to turn the GDP around. And one of them is to address quantitative easing, which we have not done. Thank you. My time is up.
Thank you. Mr. Rodding.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the last few years is particularly given the pandemic, is it's caused something called the Great Resignation, where you have a huge swath of the American economy and disproportionately affecting women leaving the workforce for X number of reasons. And so I think first and foremost, Congress needs to be conceptualizing how do we envision bringing women back into the workforce, supported by care infrastructure to enable their families and them and create a support network in order to do that. I think secondly, we need to be thinking as the Silicon Valley congressional seat, how do we actually support entrepreneurs and the flow of capital in terms of helping to promote new startups coming up in this area, as well as small businesses who are disproportionately affected by the negative consequences of inflation and other high rising costs of goods. So Congress really needs to be a forefront in providing tax incentives as well as tax breaks to really help unlock capital and support entrepreneurs and women.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
Thank you. As I said earlier, our current inflation is mostly due to the COVID federal spending blowout. It's going to take a long time to work through that. You can't really print your way out of inflation, and you can't regulate your way out of it. So we'll have to deregulate and stop printing all the money. As I also said, I'm a staunch supporter of free market enterprise. I oppose government regulation that hobbles free enterprise, but I do support government regulation that promotes free enterprise. Thus, I'm not an unabashed supporter of capitalism, because sometimes capital uses its power to put competitors out of business. That hurts free enterprise. So we need a free enterprise to cure our economy.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
Well, I am seriously against the Reaganomics, the idea of unregulated monetarism, and at the same time, military fiscal stimulus. I believe that if you want to go $30 trillion in debt, you need to tax people, and you need to tax people that have the most return on their investments. And to do that, you need to have a Congress that's willing to write a tax code that does it, and willing to mark up the spending bills in a way that benefit the greatest number of Americans. And so in general, I think we've been on the wrong page for 40 years. And if we got back to the idea that the government is not the enemy of economic growth, but is a partner in economic growth, and encourage people to realize that they have a stake in it, then I think we'd be better off.
Thank you. Mr. Otake.
Yes, as a Harvard graduate in economics, I'll focus on rising inflation's root cause, our nation's $30 trillion debt accumulated by administrations of both parties. We can balance the federal budget. I balance Menlo Park's budget every year, and it takes the same fiscal discipline that families exhibit daily. We can't, when Republicans take charge, they cut taxes. When Democrats take charge, they spend. Both of it leads to deficit, trillion-dollar deficit spendings. We've got to get that under control. To reduce soaring gas prices, we should temporarily suspend the 50-cent gas tax, especially when the state is running a huge surplus. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
In the past 2 years, 40% of the dollars in circulation were printed. And the problem with inflation is that it hurts the poor the most. The poor gets most of their compensation in cash and most of their wealth in cash. So when dollars are inflated, they're basically getting hurt the most. And the debasement of our dollar is also damaging the global reserve status of the US dollar. So on city council, known as the fiscal hawk, I think we need to cut wasteful government spending. There's some spending that's really important, but we need to prioritize because we can't do it all. And I think there's too much focus on what size of slice of pie do I get versus trying to grow the pie. And the way we grow the pie is through increased productivity with technology and education. I also agree that we want to encourage more startups. Because startups, myself, I'm a startup founder, I've started many companies, is really the key and lifeblood of this country, especially Silicon Valley. So we want to encourage not to amortize the R&D spend, which I know some members here want to do. We want to make sure that startups are successful because it's so hard to do that. And they're taking so much risk in order to bring innovation to market. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo.
Yes, thank you. Let's all recall what happened March 2020. The pandemic hit and everything stopped. Everything. No one could get to work. I don't have to paint the picture. We've all lived through it. What did we do in Congress? The first thing we did was to make sure that the American people would be able to pay their rent, buy their groceries, and live out as best they could day in and day out life. Where are we now? We have the lowest unemployment in decades, and that's a good thing. We also have inflation. Why do we have inflation? There's a huge gap between supply and demand. I think that the Competes Act relative to semiconductor chips and other steps that we've taken to fund are going to go a long way, as well as the infrastructure law that is going to bring billions of dollars to California and across the country. That's going to help grow our economy as well.
Thank
But
you.
it's not going to be easy to get out of.
Thank you. All right, we have another question here. This has to do with the Supreme Court. In light of the recently leaked Supreme Court document concerning Roe v. Wade, what would you do if you were a member of Congress? For this question, Councilmember Tanaka, you're first.
Yeah, so I think Roe v. Wade should be upheld. I think that women's rights has proven to be very successful. If you look at the crime rate since Roe v. Wade was affirmed, basically the crime rate has dropped. You bring more economic prosperity. So I think giving people a choice, giving women control of their bodies is really important. I think that, first of all, I think documents should not be leaked from the Supreme Court. That's also another issue, but a little bit unrelated to your question. So that should not be happening. So we do need some integrity on the Supreme Court. But it's kind of, I think, shocking to see that there are attempts to overturn Roe v. Wade. At the same time, I don't think the government should be sponsoring abortions. I think that we want to give people choice, and I think we want to ensure that that women's rights are affirmed. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otake.
So Roe v. Wade has been precedent for 40 years, and while we don't exactly know how this is going to happen over the next couple of weeks with the Supreme Court, if indeed they're going in that direction, I'm very concerned that by going to states, we're going to have 50 different system standards around this, and so I think as a congressperson, as a Congress member, we have to work double time to try and propose a middle ground, something that is closer to Roe versus Wade, but may also address some of the issues that have led to the Supreme Court potential ruling. And I think that's something we would have to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Yes, as a God-fearing, moderate Republican, I will say this: women should have the right to choose what they want to do, just as men do. The Supreme Court leakage, not a good thing, but it shows that there is the difference between law and politics. And what the Supreme Court decision basically is saying is that these should be political decisions, not legal decisions.
All right. Is that it? Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
I think that women deserve to have a national umbrella of protection, and it doesn't look like the Supreme Court is going to retain that for women on this issue. And that's why I think I can't stress the enormous importance of the Women's Health Protection Act, because that codifies Roe. And that's what the Congress needs to do. The president would sign that into law. And that way, every woman, every girl, every young woman, people across the country would know that there is federal protection to protect us, to protect our bodies.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
And thank you. As a libertarian Republican, I have supported a woman's right to choose until fetal viability for many years, including all my previous congressional campaigns. As a lawyer, I will say that Roe v. Wade didn't do a very good job of citing authority under the Constitution for that right, but the later Casey decision found correctly, in my view, found that right under the 14th Amendment. That should stand. Casey and Roe should both stand. A government with the power to mandate pregnancy is a government with the power to mandate just about anything, like COVID-19 vaccines or boys in the girls' bathroom. All those are privacy rights. So to my friends on the right, I say, be careful what you wish for. What goes around can come around.
Thank you. Mr. Radding.
Make no mistake, there is and has been an active war against women. From Oklahoma to Texas to now the current consideration before the Supreme Court, we can't be framing reproductive freedom and reproductive justice to the framework of economics. We're talking about human rights issues at this point. And so first and foremost, that's a given, is that we need to codify Roe v. Wade. And then that needs to be done with the incredible diligence and swiftness that Congress has. Historically, for those who don't know, Congress has overruled the Supreme Court before. So regardless of how this case goes, which we need to be active and vigilant and make sure to show our heart and intention of where this direction of the law should go, Congress has the ability. I want to work with grassroots organizations, impact litigation, and other advocacy groups to help provide the groundwork in states to defend the right wherever we can, as often as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
I believe there's no more sure way to codify women's rights than the Equal Rights Amendment, first proposed by Alice Paul nearly 100 years ago in March of 1923, and then reaffirmed really with the Senate approval of the Equal Rights Amendment 50 years later. So in 23, rather, it was proposed. In 73, the Senate, enough votes were there. It should be certified as the law of the land. And nothing changes the ground rules more than a change in the Constitution. Adding the Equal Rights Amendment makes the Supreme Court decision based on the obsolete concept of women that we're now operating under invalid. It's a moot point. Nobody's been able to tell me how you can deny women a right, a personal freedom.
Thank you. All right, we have another question. This is on transit. What support can you bring to our Bay Area rapid transit system, high-speed rail, highways, and related infrastructure? Congresswoman Eshoo, you're first for this question.
I can't help but remember 2 years ago at the forum talking about my top 2 priorities, and one of them was infrastructure. We have just passed on a bipartisan basis the single largest infrastructure legislation in the history of our country. And I'm very proud of it. I had more than one bill that was folded into that very large piece of legislation. What does it mean for our country? This is going to address the rebuilding of ports, of airports, of roads, of highways. Here at home, Caltrain, grade separations. I'm very proud to have secured the first $673 million for the electrification of Caltrain. It will deal with the grid. It will deal with waterways. It will deal with the drought issues. So this is great for America, great for us here at home.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
Thank you. Transportation and mass transit are really local issues. I really see a very limited role for the federal government, and mostly what it's been doing is financing these using printed dollars that are never repaid. And again, we're getting a lot of inflation from all this money printing. So I think transit is a local issue, should be funded locally. People can judge for themselves what's a cost-effective solution to their particular problems. So I think mass transit is fine. It may help with climate change goals. As I said, I'm interested to see the science on that. But these are local issues that I see a very limited role for the federal government in using printed money to finance these. And some of them are just boondoggles, like the high-speed rail in the Central Valley. What a waste.
All right, thank you. Mr. Frederick.
Well, I support Josh Becker's idea, which partly alluded to by Councilman Otake. In other words, integrate the BART and the VTA. Can you imagine what London would be, the underground, without a circle line? Why do we think we can do this the way we're trying to do it? And then secondly, how are we going to save 3 million barrels of oil a day, which is the bottom line envelope penciling in of how we have to cut and conserve our fuel costs if we want to reach those goals that some of us talked about earlier. So we need rapid transit that works. We need to get people. I'm not against cars. I've had a car most of my life since 16. I don't have one now, but I'll probably buy an electric one when I can afford. But the idea is we need to cut fuel and we need to improve rapid transit.
Thank you. Mr. Otaki.
I've had the privilege to serve since being on the Menlo Park City Council on the San Mateo County Transportation Authority Citizen Advisory Committee, and certainly understand the need that we have for funding for grade separations and projects such as Dumbarton Rail, which would connect Caltrain over to BART. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to be fighting for our fair share of this $1.2 trillion infrastructure spending bill, which I agree, as Congresswoman Ashew mentioned, it was bipartisan. California is over 10% of the population of the country. We should be getting $150 billion out of that transportation bill, the infrastructure bill. We're only getting 5%. We are relying on a 160-year-old Caltrain line. We need those improvements. We need better east to west mass transit connections, such as on 85. All of that will improve, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get that from the infrastructure bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radding.
We are the most innovative district in the entire country. And yet we still suffer from major traffic, potholes, and other failing infrastructure. Now, one of the reasons why I'm running is because I'm a firm believer that we need high speed, high capacity movement in and out across the Bay Area, and particularly in this region. And the thing about traffic is that it is a major pain point in people's daily lives. It is starting to actually affect what we want to do day in and day out in our major, every single little decision that we're making. So I think we really have to be conceptualizing what does a mass transit future look like that is green, that is electric, and that moves in and out of the Bay to support a flowing economy, and that jobs can actually start growing around as well. And we need a representative that actually understands that once a bill is passed, that's only the start of the process. We need to negotiate those funds to trickle down to the right places and be a partner with the grassroots organizations that need the support.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Yeah, throwing money at a problem is easy. You don't need votes. Go to Oakland, the Black neighborhoods in Oakland. You'll see potholes, so many that you cannot drive without one tire hitting a pothole, okay? So we have seen that repeatedly in California for the last 30 years. What we need is accountability of the budget. It's not Congress's money, it is our taxpayers' money. We need that accountability. It's missing.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Thank you. So if we look at the carbon output of the cities in this district, about 60 to 70% of it comes from cars driving. And climate change is something I take personally. I think a lot of people say they want climate change, but don't actually do it personally. So I bike. So for those that know me, I pretty much bike everywhere. I take public transit, I take BART, I take Caltrain. I do it all the time. And I can tell you right now, our system is broken. I think most people would agree with that. It's been 30 years and we still don't have good transit around the Bay. It's kind of piecemeal. We don't have the funding for it. It's really broken. It's hard to use. I mean, you have to really try hard to use it. And I try very hard. What we should be doing is doing things like extending BART, underground and Caltrain, Right now Caltrain goes through Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Mountain View, and it's going through some of the most expensive land in the country, and yet it's above ground. There's safety problems, there's noise. Instead, you could use that land to create more parks, more housing. And I also agree with some of the other speakers, which is that we're not getting our fair share. So if you look at the economic output of our area and you look at how much money we're getting, it's not proportional. We need to get our fair share. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from some constituents who are new to this district. What will you do specifically to make Coast Side constituents new to this district feel represented? How will you deal with issues such as coastal erosion, beach overcrowding, and others specific to this area? Dr. Fox, you're first for this question.
Thank you. In the new CD 16, we now have these coastal communities. We certainly welcome them. The issues that you address are mostly issues that are governed by the state. California has a state coastal commission that regulates development along the coast. So to the extent that there's a federal role, again, people are looking to the feds to supply the money to do the erosion controls. But again, it's the Coastal Commission that really decides what gets done. So will the state of California fund these projects and give the coastal communities what they need to do the job? I think it's a state issue.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah, maybe that'll help. I'm not sure.
What will you do specifically to make Coastside constituents feel represented? How will you help with issues such as coastal erosion, beach overcrowding, and other issues specific to this area?
Well, I think climate change, if we could address those issues, we'll get a handle on a lot of these other issues. And I'm very much concerned about water quality. And I believe that the Water Quality Act of 1972 or whatever, whenever that was passed, needs to be strengthened. People in Flint, Michigan are still drinking bottled water. We have to close beaches because of pollution and stuff like that. I can't get my head around the broadness of this question, but it seems to me that it's directly and intimately related to the environmental issues that climate change can help address. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
The coastal cities and towns have long felt that because they're isolated from those on the other side of the hill, that they are somehow an orphan or a stepchild. I've represented the coast as a member of Congress, and when I was on the Board of Supervisors. I understand their issues, and they are particular. In the case of Pacifica, there is erosion, and it's very serious. Congresswoman Spear and I are working with the Army Corps of Engineers now with the city so that they will be able to secure the funding and the funding mechanisms in the upcoming fiscal year to address that erosion. It's serious and it needs to be addressed. We have to address more farm labor housing on the coast side. My representation has always been to stay close to the people. So town hall meetings, in-person meetings, working with the city council members. It all really is very personal.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Mr. Solomon.
Yes, I understand that erosion is the major problem, but it can be engineered, but it needs a lot of discussion and a lot of analysis to figure out how to do it right. Again, it's not money. It's about getting it done right and being accountable. When I was working for Westport, Malaysia, Seaport, it was a $1 billion port infrastructure project. I laid the strategy for the port. By 2006, it was the 6th largest port in the world. That comes from thinking about the problem and being accountable. It does not come from throwing money at the problem.
Thank you. Council Member Tanaka.
So I think we need to take concrete action on climate change to deal with things like coastal erosion. But I think your question really is, how do we represent, we're here, a lot of us are here in Silicon Valley, but how do we represent the people on the coast? And I take representation very seriously. So since I got elected to city council, I've held office hours on Sunday every single weekend, whether it's a holiday or not. And I've heard a whole bunch of different issues. And in order to properly represent people, you need to understand what those issues are. And that's why I'm running a very grassroots campaign. Instead of raising a bunch of money and sending a bunch of flyers, which is one-way communication, I go out there and canvass and knock on doors. For my council campaign, I probably knocked on more doors personally than everyone else combined. And I do that every single moment of the day I can on this campaign as well. I've canvassed in Half Moon Bay. I'm canvassing Pacifica on Sunday. So I really believe in talking to people, really hearing their issues one-on-one. So I think representation is really important. And I think this is an important part of being a good representative, is truly understanding people's issues.
Thank you. Mr. Otaki.
Well, I love the coastside communities ranging from Pescadero, Half Moon Bay, Montera, El Granada, all the way up to Pacifica. We have on the San Mateo County coastline some of the most beautiful coastline in the state, and it needs to be preserved. And the best way to reach out to those communities are many of the larger events. The Half Moon Bay Pumpkin Festival in October, the Mavericks. All of those are great opportunities for us to be reaching out to the coastside communities and engage directly with residents. Absolutely, the erosion issue in Pacifica is real, it's threatening, and I agree with that. The Army Corps of Engineers is the expertise in areas like erosion and also levees on our bay side, which may be at risk for sea rise.
Thank you. Mr. Rodding.
Our coastside communities are on the front lines of climate change. Now, look, I think talk is cheap in this regard. It is easy to campaign there. It is easy to say, pay deference to it. I was in Pacifica a couple of weeks ago with a field team of scientists from Berkeley studying starfish and how the amount of starfish within a certain square mile is actually indicative of how fast oceans are actually rising. The ethos of our coastside communities is precious, and it takes a very delicate approach to understand what the actual needs are in the community. So to the core of the question, I'm hoping to open satellite offices both in Half Moon Bay and Pacifica. I think it's something we need to be super conscientious to, and that our representative needs to be there because, again, frontline of climate change. But more specifically, we must be thinking about our farmers and other agricultural participants because they need support, they need housing, they need an advocate and a champion who understands those causes, not just from the special interests who are trying to invade the area, but from the grassroots approach.
Terrific, thank you. Well, much to my surprise, we're at the last question. I'm always surprised. This question, we're going to give you 30 seconds to answer. And the question is, what question do you wish I had asked you, but I didn't? So for this question, Mr. Frederick, you're first.
Well, I'm sort of gobsmacked and thunderstruck that we have not discussed the military budget. And after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, we're on our high horse about the Russians and what they're doing in the Ukraine, and can't yet feed the children in Afghanistan in the winter. So my question is, if you believe that beyond war, I know this is a difficult thing to cover in 30 seconds, that for 3% of the defense budget, we could end starvation. My question is, what gives with American morality?
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
One question I wish you asked is, why is innovation leaving Silicon Valley? So we've seen companies like Tesla, HP, Oracle, etc., that have left Silicon Valley. I have friends that are entrepreneurs, friends that are venture capitalists that have moved out of the valley. Why has this happened? Is the vitality of Silicon Valley eroding away? And I'm concerned about that because Silicon Valley is the engine of this country and innovation is an engine of Silicon Valley. So we need to encourage it. We need to create programs that make people want to stay here and make people want to create innovation in this area.
Great, thank you. Mr. Radding.
I think we need to ask why, what is your why? I think it is fundamental to really appreciate why are you doing this? What is the purpose of you deciding to say you want to be in Congress? And for those who come to our meet and greets, to those who answer the door when I come door knocking, to those who I meet, you know my why. I ask that you take a look at my website at audronradding.com to learn a little bit about my trajectory. I think we need a new generation of leadership here to match the innovation in Silicon Valley, innovation of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area more generally.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
So I'd like to talk about education. I'm a staunch supporter of school choice. Just give the money to the parents, let them decide how to educate their kids. I trust the parents a lot more than I trust the unions and the boards of education. This is particularly important to low-income communities of color, and I would start with them. Let's start giving those communities full funding for school choice, and we can work our way up to the wealthier kids later. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
There are quite a few questions I would have asked, but the most important question I would say, why are jobs leaving, good quality jobs not coming to California? It has happened for the last 20 years, and then now it stopped. Our big corporate guys have taken 100,000 jobs out of California to other states. Why?
Thank you. Mr. Otaki.
As a dad and a former mayor, I'm worried about rising crime, including violence against Asians, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about it. If we neglect to prosecute smash and grab looting, today's low-level offenders will become tomorrow's hardened criminals, and that's a result of Prop 47. We must fund our police and give officers non-lethal tools to keep our streets safe through increased federal cops grants. A decade ago, we provided Menlo Park Police non-lethal tasers, cameras, community policing, and training to diffuse and de-escalate situations.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Eshoo.
I wish that you had asked what inspires us. And I would have responded with the following. My constituents inspire me. Throughout the district, especially during the pandemic, I have seen the true decency and goodness of people. And I will never, ever forget it. It's written on my soul. And to represent a district that is as caring, as compassionate, is, I think, the best imprimatur for all of us.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to the closing statements. As I said earlier, these are in reverse order from the opening statements. And that means, Mr. Solomon, you're first.
Yes.
A minute and a half.
That may be too much. There are a lot of really big issues stemming from how the federal budget has been managed. And with respect to that, I have laid down 5 ground rules to how to manage the budget. It does not prevent big government, but it ensures that we do not burden the taxpayer. At the rate we are going with phenomenal deficits, the taxes are going to go up by 2.6%, whether we like it or not. Interest rates are going up. And right now, with the Congressional Budget Office forecast of interest rate of 1.5%, that is no longer valid. If interest rate goes up more than 3%, the interest required to pay for these public debts will consume 25 to 40% of our taxpayers' money. The government will cease to be feasible. Yes, you can say you can borrow more money from the public markets, but that would be equivalent to borrowing from a loan shark to pay the banker. We need a lot more accountability of our government. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Eshoo, you're next.
This office is a sacred trust, and I have worked every day to be worthy of it. My voting record and my legislative achievements reflect the values of my constituents: protecting our democracy, protecting our environment, protecting choice, advancing universal health care, innovation, competition, civil rights, and human rights. I'm proud that my work has earned the support of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, endorsed by the Sierra Club, and that my voting record is rated 100% by the League of Conservation Voters. No matter how tough, no matter how daunting our challenges are, I've always thought that America and our democracy are worth fighting for. My beautiful parents and the nuns who educated me taught me very well: integrity, fairness, faith, service, and love of country. I work daily for you, carrying these values, and to be the best I can for my constituents. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I respectfully ask for your vote on June 7th.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
I'm running for Congress to ensure we all have a chance at opportunity, because that is what America is. With each passing day, a hard-earned dollar buys less health care coverage, less education, less housing, and less food. It's clear that we no longer have anyone fighting for us. Tech is beginning to leave Silicon Valley. Opportunity is waning. That's why I'm running for Congress. This race is about action versus inaction. What Silicon Valley needs is healthcare competition, quality education for all, immediate action on climate change, and a stop to government wastefulness. We need a legislator for the digital age. This can be done now. It just takes political courage. If flourishing Silicon Valley is possible, it's time for a fresh perspective. I'm honored to have received over 400 endorsements. So thank you for everyone for organizing this. Thank you for all that have attended, and humbly ask for your vote. And also, I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can go to my website at gregtanaka.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radding.
With every door I knock on, I find a faith, a beauty, a decency in the people I meet. Campaigning can be grueling, but every person I meet gives me strength. And when you think of, how the Constitution was written and how it was designed, there's not a lot that I would agree with how it was originally written. But the people's house is an interesting concept. An election every 2 years. Why? Because I think behind that is the thought that we're supposed to have a representative every 2 years that reflects differences in trends, in demographics, in current events. You want to update your House member to reflect what is now the new challenges with a new perspective. And so what we're facing, the challenges at this moment are grave. We're talking about a climate threat that is existential, housing issues that is locking out a new generation of folks from living here and really harming innovation coming up, and also educational issues that are really starting to damper our opportunities. So I'm running for Congress because my story is so rare, and it shouldn't take a divine conspiracy to move out of a car into a Silicon Valley law firm. So I'm really trying to fight for innovation, opportunity, and equality to bring it back to Washington, D.C. Please visit www.ajwanrading.com. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Dr. Fox.
Thank you for sponsoring this forum this evening. It's been a fascinating discussion. As I said earlier, inflation is, in my view, our biggest problem, and most polls agree that most Americans see it that way. I see that the inflation got kicked off by the massive COVID spending, and it's going to be very hard to reverse that. And now we've also heard this evening a lot of plans for more big federal spending programs to solve a variety of problems, all of which are going to have to be funded by more borrowing, more money printing, and that will lead to more inflation. So the existential challenge of our time, in my view, is whether we're going to be able to afford the progressive agenda, or whether we're going to have to re-engineer that to depend on private enterprise and people's personal value judgments and not the judgments of the government. So I think that's the question before us. We will find out in November whether people think that big government is the answer to our problems, or whether we're going to have to rely on limited government and more of our own resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
Thank you for this opportunity to address the voters and the panel here tonight. As I come to this point, 50 years in politics, I spent 30 years in the classroom, some of those overlapping. I'm 76 years old. I'm still, as I tried to say in my last statement, amazed at our inactivity in critical areas of human endeavor. And one that I would like to see brought to the forefront is the control of nuclear weapons, with the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists having the doomsday clock at 90 seconds or so before midnight. I think our inability to discuss these things, to allow one person, the President of the United States, the power to unleash nuclear hell, shows a big oversight in the progress of self-government. And if we want to get government of the people, by the people, and for the people engaged, we're going to need to move beyond party. I consider myself a trans-partisan person, in that the other people are Democrats or Republicans, declared so. And I want everybody to look at my statement, read my statement, give me a call or ping me if they have any questions, and to vote John Carl Frederick on June 7th and in the fall.
Thank you very much. Mr. Otake.
Voters want a credible alternative in the November general election, not just another shade of blue. Experience has prepared me to address the major issues that are facing our country today. We talked about inflation and its root cause, our continuing deficit spending. We talked about rising crime and our need to support and fund the police. As the only candidate with national and homeland security experience, I understand we must support Ukraine. China wants Taiwan. They're watching how we respond to Russia. But the administration must stop detailing every weapon we provide the Ukrainians. You don't want to do that and give that list to the Russians. One of the first things I would do is to sponsor the act to preserve our neighborhoods, local control, home rule, and the American Dream Act to roll back and empower our local councils because of the SB 9 elimination of single-family zoning. I also talked about our need to get our fair share of the infrastructure spending bill while serving as a Menlo Park Mayor and Council member with 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. We found common ground and solutions together. In Congress, all work to find common sense solutions that have bipartisan support. I would be honored for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto and our co-sponsoring organizations, I want to thank the candidates for their dedication in choosing to run for office and also for spending this evening with us at this forum. I also want to thank our audience for their engagement in our democratic process. For the June election, the Santa Clara County Leagues have already held candidate forums for the offices of sheriff and district attorney. You can find videos of those forums on our website. This Thursday, May 5th, will be the final countywide forum, and that will be for the office of Santa Clara County Assessor. We hope to see you there. We also encourage you to visit votersedge.org. There you'll find nonpartisan expanded information about candidates, ballot measures, and links to other sources of information about the upcoming election. For the June election, all California voters will receive vote by mail ballots, which will be mailed by May 7th. We encourage you to vote early by mail or drop your ballot off at a secure ballot drop box. Locations are listed in your ballot. You can also visit a vote center on or before Election Day. For example, if you need assistance or require a replacement ballot because you misplaced yours or made a mistake on it. Locations of vote centers, days and hours of operation are all listed in your ballot. Please encourage your family, your friends, your neighbors to vote in this important election. Thank you all. Do vote by June 7th. Good night.